The end of a narcissist is never a quiet, peaceful fading of the light. It is a terrifying, desperate crash into the absolute void they spent their entire life running from. You have seen their arrogance, their cruel smirk, and their unbending demand to be worshipped as a god. But what exactly happens when that manufactured god finally realizes they are out of time? You have carried the heavy weight of their abuse for years, wondering if they would ever face the profound consequences of their endless cruelty. They seemed completely invincible, untouched by the massive destruction they left in your timeline. But there is a biological and psychological wall they eventually hit. And the collision is utterly devastating to witness today. We are going to expose the 6 undeniable signs that a narcissist is suffering severely as their life comes to a close. This is not about celebrating physical illness. It is about recognizing the catastrophic psychological collapse that happens when their mask permanently fractures. When the body fails, the ego is left completely exposed to the freezing, harsh elements. Their entire existence was built on the desperate illusion of ultimate control. They dictated your reality, your emotions, and your absolute worth. But death is the one universal boundary they cannot gaslight, manipulate, or smear to their flying monkeys. It is the ultimate truth teller. And for someone who has lived a complete lie, the truth is agonizing torture to face. You might expect them to soften, to suddenly seek genuine redemption, or finally offer that apology you have been starving for. But the reality of a dying predator is far more chilling. They do not magically transform into a warm, loving human being. Instead, their pathology intensifies. The poison in their veins becomes much more concentrated as the clock winds down fast. Why is it so incredibly important for you to understand this final stage? Because your deep empathy will try to pull you back into the burning building. You will feel that familiar guilt, whispering that you need to save them. But you must see the terrifying mechanics of their final descent. This secret knowledge is your ultimate shield against their dying manipulation. The first sign of their severe suffering is a rapid, deeply pathetic amplification of their victimhood. As their physical strength fades, they weaponize their illness. They are not just sick, they are the most tragically misunderstood victim in human history. They demand that the entire world stops spinning to grieve the unfairness of their declining, mortal condition. This amplified victimhood is a desperate attempt to extract high-grade emotional fuel. They want your tears, your frantic worry, and your complete, undivided submission to their pain. If you refuse to break down and worship at the altar of their suffering, they will lash out with a venomous rage that betrays their true, dark nature. The illness becomes their new weapon. The second sign is the complete, terrifying disintegration of their carefully crafted public mask. For decades, they exhausted immense energy keeping up the charming facade for the outside world. But suffering drains their internal battery. The mask completely slips, revealing a bitter, incredibly paranoid, and utterly cruel entity that shocks even their most loyal fans. Settle in and prepare your heart. We are pulling back the heavy, velvet curtain on the final, agonizing chapters of their toxic empire. You survived the absolute worst of their psychological warfare. Now, you are going to understand exactly what happens when the universe finally collects the heavy debt they owe. Let the psychological breakdown of the predator truly begin. To truly understand their final agony, we must look deeply into the absolute void of their mind. The third sign is their frantic, terrifying paranoia regarding their legacy. A narcissist does not fear death in the normal human sense. They fear being entirely forgotten. They realize they have built no genuine connections, only transactional contracts that are now expiring. Imagine a dark parasite that suddenly realizes the host body is actively dying, and there is nowhere left to run. They look around the freezing room and see that the people standing there are doing so out of heavy obligation, not pure love. This realization triggers a visceral, vibrating panic. They try to forcefully rewrite history, demanding you validate their greatness. They will frantically try to control the narrative of their own ending. They dictate exactly how people must remember them, heavily editing the script of their life to erase the massive abuse they inflicted. If you dare to introduce a single ounce of reality into their dying fantasy, They will attack your character with a desperation that is truly chilling to witness today. The fourth sign is the sudden, jarring onset of extreme financial or material hoarding. As their physical body completely fails, they desperately cling to the physical objects they can still control. They obsess over their money, their property, or their will. These lifeless objects become pathetic substitutes for the actual human soul they never bothered to cultivate. They use their remaining assets as a toxic psychological leash. They will dangle inheritances or sentimental items over your head, demanding ultimate compliance for a chance at a final reward. It is a deeply sick, twisted game. They are trying to orchestrate your behavior from beyond the grave, ensuring their dark, heavy influence outlasts their failing, mortal heartbeat. This is where the internal chaos permanently settles in for them. They cannot feel genuine comfort, so they substitute it with absolute tyranny. They punish the caregivers, verbally abusing the exact people wiping their feverish brow. They project their immense, terrifying helplessness onto everyone else, making the entire house feel like a highly volatile, active war zone. They operate on a deeply flawed, rigid algorithm of control. I suffer, so you must suffer exponentially more. They cannot tolerate seeing you possess the vital life force they are rapidly losing. Every time you smile or show resilience, a piece of their false self violently dies. They actively try to drag you down into the cold dirt with them out of pure, unadulterated envy. Think of it like a dark puppet master whose hands are finally becoming paralyzed. They are lying in the bed, frantically trying to pull the heavy strings, but the puppets are no longer dancing. It is pathetic and deeply disturbing. They are performing their ultimate tragedy for an audience that has finally learned how to see right through the incredibly cheap fake filter. This is exactly why their suffering feels so incredibly toxic to be around. You are processing a severe trauma response disguised as end-of-life care. They need you to stay broken and entirely dependent, even as they take their final breaths. Your deep, silent pain is the only solid evidence they have that their life actually mattered. It is a spiritually bankrupt existence. They will never, ever admit this terror out loud. They project an image of perfect, unbothered superiority to the very end. But behind closed doors, the psychological rot is spreading incredibly fast. Every boundary you hold during their decline is another heavy nail in the coffin of their grandiosity. You are watching a slow, entirely invisible psychological execution. The dramatic turning point rarely comes with a massive, screaming explosion. Sometimes, it happens quietly on a random Tuesday afternoon. You are standing near their bed, absorbing their bitter complaints, and the hypnotic spell is just entirely gone. And then it stops. Just like that, you finally see the mechanical, empty nature of their suffering, and you feel nothing. Over in their dark, isolated world, that exact moment of your absolute clarity is a complete psychological nightmare. They can literally feel the massive energetic shift in the room. They sense that the psychic tether between you has been permanently severed. This is the heavy plot twist they never prepared for. Their most reliable victim just became an untouchable ghost. Watch how the toxic dynamic dramatically flips right before your eyes. The fifth sign is their sudden, terrifying attempt at a fake, deathbed confession or apology. When they realize their cruelty is failing to control you, they pivot to manufactured remorse. They offer a highly calculated apology, desperately throwing cheap bait into the dark water, praying you will bite. But your healed intuition immediately senses the trap. The apology lacks all genuine accountability. It is a performance designed to extract your complete forgiveness, absolving them of their heavy sins without doing any actual spiritual work. When you calmly refuse to grant them that cheap absolution, their panicked face contorts. The mask violently shatters completely. They cannot handle being rendered totally powerless over your pure conscience. They will instantly revert to rage, proving the apology was a complete, calculated lie. They need to control your final memory of them. But you do not even defend yourself against their pathetic, dying outbursts. You let them spin in their own toxic trap. You have become an absolute brick wall. This is the exact moment the dark predator realizes they are actually the prey of their own sick mind. They deeply needed your emotional submission so they could die feeling like a powerful god. But your newfound, ironclad boundaries are completely suffocating them. They are trapped in a freezing room with a mirror that only shows their true, incredibly ugly, aging face. You see, every single time you choose your own absolute peace over their manufactured deathbed drama, you are executing a flawless psychological strike. You aren't doing it out of malice or petty spite. You are doing it out of deep, profound self-love. But to the narcissist, your self-love feels like a violent, targeted attack on their soul. It burns them like pure acid. They might try to loudly triangulate you with other family members, desperately hoping to spark a tiny flame of jealousy or guilt in your healing heart. They play the saint to outsiders while acting like a demon behind closed doors. But your healed eyes see right through the cheap, fake filter. You know the mechanical deadness they bring. You just feel profound, deep pity. Your genuine, deep detachment is the ultimate, untouchable weapon. It is cold, clean, and entirely lethal to their fake persona. They want to pull you back into their chaotic mud, to make you scream or cry, to prove they still have a heavy grip on your soul. But you are standing on incredibly high ground now. You look down, shake your head slowly, and entirely walk away. The massive power shift is now permanent and completely absolute. They finally realize they spent their entire life trying to break a person who was fundamentally unbreakable at the core. They played their absolute best manipulative cards, and they still lost the entire dark game. The reality of your permanent, brilliant escape settles deep into their freezing, dying bones. What happens next is dark, deeply honest, and totally unflinching. Without your pure, high-grade energy to feed on, the narcissist begins to experience a terminal, agonizing psychological collapse. The sixth and final sign is absolute, terror-filled isolation. They realize, with crushing weight, that they are surrounded by people, yet they are dying completely alone today. The harsh consequences heavily show up in the quiet, deeply lonely details of their final days. They desperately try to project immense power, but the deep, echoing void your boundary left behind is slowly consuming them. They are entirely starving to death for the absolute pure warmth and total submission you used to freely give them. Their internal world is freezing over. You might catch small, deeply sad glimpses of their rapid psychological decline if you observe them. Their eyes dart around the room with intense, paranoid fear. They are terrified of what comes next because their entire philosophy was based on earthly dominance. They have absolutely zero spiritual foundation to lean on. The carefully crafted persona completely disintegrates. They live in a state of constant, incredibly paranoid reflection. Every time they look back at their life, they have to aggressively rewrite the memories to avoid the crushing guilt of their actions. Because they know, deep down in their incredibly cold core, that they destroyed the best things they ever had. They are permanently locked out of the human experience of love. This is the dark, inescapable, terrifying hell they built entirely for themselves. They brutally pushed away the one person who truly saw them, who truly tried to love them, just to feed their sick, highly fragile ego. And now they have to painfully live their final moments with the heavy ghost of that massive mistake. Your beautiful, untouchable memory heavily haunts them. They will try to loudly convince the remaining flying monkeys that they are at total peace. But you know the absolute, undeniable truth. You know what they look like when the lights are totally off and the crushing, heavy realization of their mortality sets in. You know the hollow, terrified look in their incredibly cold eyes. They are a failing shell going through the motions. Every single emotional boundary you uphold is a permanent, agonizing reminder of their ultimate failure. When you entirely refuse to let them abuse you on their deathbed, you are reminding them that they are fundamentally powerless. They cannot charm you, they cannot gaslight you, and they cannot break you ever again. They are rendered completely and utterly impotent today. The deep, heavy tragedy is that they can never actually learn from this immense, profound loss. A normal person feels remorse, reflects, and completely grows in their final hours. But a sick narcissist is completely allergic to absolute accountability, even at the very end. They will take their dark, toxic delusions straight into the grave. It is a miserable, endless void. You used to feel deeply, profoundly sorry for them. You used to falsely think that with enough pure love, you could magically heal their broken inner child and completely warm their cold soul before they passed. But the healed empath finally sees the brutal truth. They fiercely wanted to pull you down into their sickness. You absolutely refused to drown in their dark sea. This is the ultimate, totally devastating consequence of their severe psychological and emotional abuse. They truly thought they were destroying your entire identity. But instead, they destroyed their own access to the only real source of pure light they ever had. You entirely took back your autonomy, your immense compassion, and your brilliant soul. Their world went black. So where does that leave you right now, as you watch this incredibly dark chapter finally close? It leaves you standing firmly in the beautiful, incredibly clean air of your own massive freedom. You survived a brutal psychological war zone. You took the absolute worst they had to offer, and you transmuted that intense pain into profound power. You totally mastered the game. Every time you choose your own absolute peace today, you are performing a highly radical act of spiritual defiance. When you choose to protect your heart from their dying toxicity, you are actively winning. Your brilliant emotional autonomy is your ultimate revenge. It is a living, breathing testament to the fact that their dark poisons simply failed completely to break you. I know there are quiet, complicated days when the deep trauma bond still hits you out of nowhere. Days when the dark memories feel heavy and the sick conditioning whispers that you should be doing more for them. That is completely normal. Deep healing is never a perfectly straight line. But in those moments, remember the immense, terrifying strength it took to claim your life. You are no longer the frightened, exhausted person trying to decode their confusing, totally toxic demands. You are someone who speaks the beautiful language of absolute boundaries with total fluency. You can spot dark manipulation even on a deathbed. They tried to break your fundamental trust in humanity, but they only managed to sharpen your fierce, brilliant intuition. Stop looking for any kind of ultimate closure from the highly sick person who broke you. The absolute closure is in the permanent, heavy silence of their failing ego. The closure is the profound, incredible peace you feel when you realize your mind is finally yours again. The abuser will never hand you an honest apology. Your brilliant, deeply peaceful life is the true cure. You have firmly taken back the heavy pen, and you are writing the rest of this brilliant story entirely on your own terms now. The beautiful chapters ahead are filled with people who will deeply respect your boundaries, who will cherish your depth, and who will never ask you to submit to cruelty. You completely cleared out the toxic debris to make room for absolute love. Let them stay totally trapped in their endless, entirely miserable loop of fake superiority and highly shallow, empty connections as their time runs out. They are exactly where they truly belong in the cold dark. But you belong in the brilliant light. You belong in a safe space where your massive heart is celebrated, not exploited. You earned every single ounce of this peace. This harrowing journey was never just about escaping a narcissist. It was always about totally returning to your true, authentic self. It was a brutal, incredibly painful initiation into your own immense power. You had to meet the absolute darkest parts of human nature so you could finally recognize the blinding, incredible strength you deeply possess. You won the dark war. So keep fiercely choosing yourself loudly, without a single, tiny drop of apology. Every ironclad boundary you set is a beautiful, profound love letter to your brilliant future self. Let the dark predator fade completely into the static noise of your past. They are a completely closed chapter, a dark lesson learned, and a sad ghost that has absolutely no power over your life. You went through literal, absolute hell just to finally realize that you are completely, totally fireproof. They desperately tried to break your spirit, but they only ended up building a heavy, brilliant fortress they can never, ever enter again. Hold your head high, breathe in the clean, beautiful air, and keep walking forward. You are completely and absolutely untouchable.